This Ariel 350 Red Hunter has proved quite an interesting challenge to work on. Initially it was a non-runner despite having a good spark, because the ignition timing was set so that it sparked when the piston was at the other top dead centre, 360 degrees out. So I put that right, did a few other little things and got it running, and it seemed quite willing to start and run, although there were lubrication system issues, which I think I'm going to have to try and get a new oil pump on it to totally fix that. But anyway, I had it running and got to the point where I tried to move it under its own power, and the gear selector mechanism was obviously incorrectly set up and wrongly indexed. It was a job getting it into gear, and it didn't really want to move under its own power. It just sort of grated and lurched about, and also pulling a clutch in wouldn't stop it. So I reset the indexing of the gear selector mechanism to get the gears selecting properly and tried again, and same thing, put it into gear with a great big grind and off it went, even with the clutch pulled in. So I thought, well, I better start having a look at the clutch and other things. So as you can see, the gearbox is stripped. We'll come to that in a minute. First thing I looked at was the clutch, and I've already made a video of it where the clutch centre, as it spun, sort of had a throw on it and was wobbling around, and on top of that the clutch pressure plate, when you pull the clutch in, didn't lift evenly because one spring of the 5 was much stronger and harder than all the others, so the clutch was bound to drag to start with. But on top of that, when you release the clutch, there was a horrible sort of grating, graunching, and although the bike moved forwards, it felt as though there may have been broken teeth or something in the gearbox. So that's when I decided I'd better have a look inside the gearbox, and obviously I had to remove the clutch and clutch centre and everything for access to get the main shaft out the gearbox, which also involved in me having a little look at this engine shaft shock absorber. Now I've put it back on in the order it was when I took it off, and this will explain the sort of almost total lack of drive and the sort of graunching feeling when it tried to move away under its own power. We've got this. Now this is the wrong order, and the spring with that cup in it, and then here's the moving part on the splines of the clutch shock absorber. We see the engine sprocket can spin freely on the shaft, and it's dependent on this and the spring loading on this to give us the drive. With this fitted this way round, it's very easy to put together and get the nuts on and tighten it up, but the spring loading isn't going to be adequate on the shock absorber shaft, so it would have been slipping. The correct way would have been this way. This would go on first, then the spring this way round like that, and I've got a feeling that there may be some sort of special washer missing from inside that cup, and then that would go on, and then followed by the nuts tightened up, which would put much greater spring loading on this, and we might actually get some drive to the clutch and then onto the gearbox. So that's got to be put right. Not a big problem, but I might need to look at some parts books and possibly need a component or two. And that would be the way it should go, like that, you see. Cut end there facing out, that end on the splines of the drive shaft. Anyway, we've got the two lock nuts for it, well, the nut and the lock nut, so that's not a problem. Onto the gearbox. That was full of grease that must have been about 70 odd years old, so I've cleaned it all out. There's a bit of staining in there, but it has been cleaned with solvent and rags and so on. And that main shaft sleeve gear seems to be in good order, both internally and externally, so we can leave that alone. And the rest of the gears and the selectors are over here, and I'll just lift the selectors out of the way and everything will roll off, no doubt. And we can see this main shaft sliding gear, although the teeth on it are okay for driving the corresponding gears on the lay shaft, the ends of the teeth on the main shaft sliding gear are very, very worn, and that is where they would slot in to the inside of the sleeve gear to engage top gear. So it's very, very likely that under load this may jump out of top gear. So in an ideal world it would be nice to be able to replace this sliding gear. Also a sliding dog on the lay shaft. It's not nearly as bad as that one, but there is wear on it. We could probably get away with that one, but at the very least I'd like to try and get a replacement for this one and put the gearbox back together. The clutch was wobbling about on the main shaft because this washer, actually not that one, that's the thrust washer, there's another washer that sort of fits on here before the clutch centre, and that was badly located. It was sort of partially over this and partially off it, and it was causing the clutch centre to tilt, so as it spun that was wobbling around, so that was easy to put right. But in the main, if I can get a replacement for this, I can put the gearbox back together and that should all be fine. All the teeth on the gears are fine, no other problems with it, so it's all nice and clean. I've checked everything, that's all ready to go back together, but it would be a shame to put it back together with that in and then find out that come to use top gear and perhaps get on an uphill stretch or open the throttle a bit and it jumps out of gear. So hopefully if one of those can be had, we get a new one and put it in. Then it'll just be a matter of trying to replace the oil pump with a new one, and other than that the engine when it's running sounds rather good, so we might not be too far off getting this thing sorted. But it's amazing the number of things that were wrong with it. Whoever put it together last must have been tearing their hair out wondering why it wouldn't go properly. Well, it wouldn't go at all with the ignition timing set as it was, but even if it did start for them, they'd have had a whole shed load of other problems with it, and all really down to being badly assembled rather than things being broken or worn. The only serious wear is in the oil pump and that sliding gear on the main shaft. Other than that, I think everything's relatively good. So next thing to do is try and find out where I can get some parts for it from and take it from there.